Why do Americans go crazy for college sports? I've thought about this quite a lot, and I've noticed that, whether it's college football, college basketball, the games can attract like hundreds of thousands of people. Like, the teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, they just the stadiums are packed. And here, university sports, nobody watches. Like nobody watches. Like, why is that? Why is it that Americans, like put college sports on this massive platform, this pedestal? Like, what is it like that attracts people to it?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Lost in the Pond with me, Lawrence Brown. It's that time of year again. We have just had March Madness, or what is known here in the United States as March Madness. That is when everything goes mad in March for basketball, specifically college basketball. Now, in 2010, not long after I'd moved to the United States really, I got caught up in this whole March Madness because the Butler Bulldogs of Indiana made it to the final, the championship final of that very year. Now, they lost ultimately, but my wife and sister-in-law were supporting them very fervently. Why? Because they were alumni of Butler University in Indianapolis. And, still new to the country, I didn't really understand what was going on. I kind of just understood that, they're just getting behind their university team. But then I thought, well, why is their university team on television? This is quite extraordinary. I've never really seen anything like this. And then you come to find that the whole of Indianapolis is kind of behind the Butler Bulldogs, not just in 2010, when unfortunately they lost, but also in 2011, when they also lost. And it seemed like the whole city was galvanized by the Butler Bulldogs' run to the final. Now,
so is that what it is then? Basically, just the team that you like, the college that you went to, you stick with it, like you kind of stick with it for life type thing?
Like I said, in England, you wouldn't really see anything like that. I couldn't imagine, for example, my university of Lancaster University getting to some kind of final and then having that final watched by millions on television. It's just not something that happens. The only real thing I can think of in terms of university sports being televised is the rowing between Oxford and Cambridge that you see once a year. Other than that, it's not really a big thing in the UK. So today, I just want to get to the bottom of why it is the United States is so in love with college sports.
Let's go.
So granted, while, pro sports like the NFL do dominate the television ratings here year round, collegiate sports are still wildly popular. The aforementioned college basketball championship finals can pull in anywhere from 15 to 35 million viewers.
That's a lot. 35 million viewers. That would be almost half of the UK. Like England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Almost half of the whole of the UK.
35 million is quite extreme. That was back in the late 1970s when Larry Bird went up against Magic Johnson's team. But nonetheless, 15 million people cheering in at the very least. I mean, that is what EastEnders was getting in its heyday. Now, granted, there are more people in the United States, but 15 million people is not something to scoff at. And that's just the basketball. I mention that right now because in real life we are closing in on the championship game in 2019. But actually, college football does even better. I mean, you'll see things like semi-final matches garner that kind of viewing figures here in the United States. And if they were just watching on television, that would be one thing, right? But they're also packing huge stadiums, right? So think of Wembley Stadium. It's the largest stadium in the entire United Kingdom. A large capacity, I think, of about 90,000 people can fit into Wembley Stadium. So if you're not from the United States, it might blow your mind, as it did mine, that there are 8 colleges in this very country that have a capacity of more than 100,000
which is crazy. Genuinely, like the only professional sports teams in football, soccer, that have a stadium bigger than that are maybe Barcelona. I think that's the only one that has over 100,000 capacity. Yeah, in the whole world. And you know how big soccer is, right? It's just crazy how big these college stadiums are.
I've actually been to one of the Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Absolutely huge. When I went there, we experienced the largest outdoor attendance for a soccer game in US history at that time. But they pack these houses. They actually exceed 100,000 attendees on average at a lot of these games. So,
how much does a college football game ticket cost? Like, what's the price range? Like what for a good seat? Like somewhere decent that you get a good view, What's it going to cost?
In 2010, not only Michigan, which averaged about 111,000 attendees, but Ohio State and Penn State all exceeded an average gate of 100,000 throughout their college football season. Now, admittedly, you're never going to see those kind of attendances on a basketball court, but while we're on the subject of basketball, that brings me on to something that a lot of people in the United States take part in at this very time of year, and that is a basketball bracket. Even I got involved this year. Basically, what you do is once you know all of the seedings and all of the first games in this NCAA basketball tournament, you then go on to some provider, in my case it was CBS Sports.
And then what, like predict who's going to progress sort of thing?
You choose which teams you think are going to win in each round, getting all the way to the Final Four and then the championship game and calling that winner. And if you're in a pool with a load of other people and you happen to get more points based on the scoring system, then you win. You win your entire bracket and it's amazing and you get this prize. So I was so excited by this notion that I went to the great liberty of firstly learning the seedings of each team to try to work out which ones were good, and also just look at the form book, the history guides and all that. I delved so deep. I did all of this investigative research and ultimately I failed badly. I got none of my teams to the Final Four.
This is the thing, there's always surprises. Like, you know, if you go by pure logic and form, every year there's always a team that does better than everybody expects. Like, it happens in every sport. There's always upsets.
But if you took part in such a bracket and you have any teams remaining in the tournament, let me know in the comments below and I'll give you a thumbs up or something of that ilk. All that to reiterate that college sports are, comparatively to the rest of the world, huge in the United States. That leaves us with one big question. Yes, why? Why are college sports so big in the United States? Well, you have to go back in time a little bit to the 19th century. That's a century that I often like to return to. Not literally, I don't have a time machine. I'm running out of breath. But in about the 1850s, the first sort of collegiate sport event occurred in the United States when Yale and Harvard engaged in, you guessed it, a rowing competition. You see how this comes full circle? And so in the 19th century, you have all of these sort of college sports emerging, one of which is, in fact, American football. But over time, questions start to emerge about the safety of some of these sports, so they need some kind of rule-making body, right? So that's where the NCAA comes in. So after years of evolving its name, it arrives at the name that we know today as the NCAA in about 1910, and about a decade later, after just sort of passing a load of rules relating to these college sports, the first ever NCAA championship takes place. This is in track and field, and then in the late 30s, about 1939, the very first NCAA basketball championship like that we know today took place for the first time. So right off the bat,
do college athletes get paid now? Or is it still against the rules? Because, I mean, if they're generating millions of dollars for their teams, because, you know, let's say that a college football game sells out 100,000 tickets. Let's say the average ticket price is $50. That's $5 million, right? Surely the players should see some of that. Surely.
Pun intended, baseball reference. College sports are already more traditional than their sort of pro equivalent for the most part. And so just in that respect alone, they've maintained their position in American culture. But given the sort of financial powerhouse status of a lot of these pro organizations like the NFL, is tradition really enough to keep these college sports in the public eye? Well, probably not by itself. The truth is the colleges themselves make quite a lot of money from their sporting endeavors. And the real big thing here as well that sets, you know, US colleges apart from British colleges is that US colleges attract some of the top athletes in the nation, some of the top young athletes in the nation, with the promise of an education. You know, sports here is quite tied to
the scholarships.
college education, whereas in Britain it really isn't. I mean, if you think about some of the top football stars, Wayne Rooney, David Beckham, etc., you know, they were signing up to their respective football clubs perhaps at the age of 7, playing for the sort of teenage equivalent of Manchester United or whoever it might have been, and then they'll make their first team debut while they're a teenager. But in that time, they'll have finished school at 16, and that's where their education ends. There is no college for them. Here, it's very much tied to a sort of college education. Kids will be given a sports scholarship, for example, to attend that university. And then, you know, depending on their name recognition as it grows and grows and grows, that can be good for the college. It helps to create recognition not only for that player, but for the college, and then, you know, funding and things like that becomes more paramount.
Yeah, that's another thing. I really like how structured it is. If you want to become a professional athlete in America, there's a clear playbook. You do very well, you know, in high school, you go to a good high school with a good team, then you go to a good college with a good team, and then, you know, it's really structured, then you get drafted. Here, if you want to become a professional soccer player, there's no guidebook unless your dad was a ex-pro himself. You know, there's just nothing. All you do is join a good team and hopefully there's a scout that's watching you. There's no like clear structure, if you know what I mean. I prefer the American system here.
On top of that, and I don't really have statistics for this, but it's just some more anecdotal and observational on my part, is that I think people here that attended a university then went on to become an alumni of that university are generally more proud of that fact than people in England would be of attending a university. I, for example, don't have any sort of memorabilia from my own university that I utilize in my daily life as an adult. No sweaters, jumpers, or anything of that ilk, whereas you see it quite commonly here in the United States. And so even years, sometimes decades after graduating, you know, alumni from those colleges will still don that jumper, that sweater, and support the team when it's going far in whatever competition it is we're talking about. You're just not going to see that in the UK. So alumni here are fans for life. On that very note, while I was researching for this video, I found this great quote by John Mackay, who is a football coach formerly of USC, which is the University of Southern California, and he was asked how USC had retained such, you know, strong support in Southern California despite the existence of Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams, a pro football team, and he said nobody graduated from the University of the Rams. And it's very
that's a great way of explaining
very
it.
interesting that he should say that, and it's very interesting that we should be on the topic of the Rams, because you want to talk about pro football teams. This is a team that started in Cleveland, Ohio, moved to Los Angeles, moved to St. Louis, and then moved to Los Angeles. On the other side of the coin, your college team is not going to move cities. It's going to stay there, right there, where you want it. And
that's another thing, the whole moving of teams. Doesn't that cause the fan base to kind of continuously change? Like if you support the LA Rams and then they move to Iowa, like you can't go to the games anymore, can you? Unless you're going to fly to Iowa every weekend.
A lot of cities, indeed a lot of states, that's very important because they don't always have a pro equivalent within driving distance. Take the states, for example, of Kansas, Kentucky, Virginia. They don't have, for example, basketball teams that play in the NBA. They just don't exist in those entire states. But each of those states do boast decent to very good college basketball teams. And I think that that's very important for people that live in those states. They develop a sense of community around that college and around what that college has to offer from a sports point of view. And so they don't have to drive to these sort of major cities to take in the big teams, the big pro teams, and offer that support. And they know their team will never move cities because it's college based. It's not a franchise that can just move to wherever it wants. So there's that sense of loyalty that remains. And so a final point that I want to make today, and a lot of people have said this to me over the years whenever I've talked to them about sort of college sports versus pro sports. You know, they often say that when you're talking about the NBA or the NFL, for example, that sometimes the pro version of these sports sort of lacks that soul, or it lacks that sort of raw fight that you might.
So the professional versions are a bit too sort of like professional, like polished. They don't really have that personal sense of investment kind of thing.
Find in the sort of the college level, and that the appreciation for those college sports comes about more because of that, and people are more ready to watch them. I know that I find college basketball absolutely fascinating, whereas I'm not so drawn to watch the NBA, for example. And so that, in a nutshell, or rather big nutshell, is why I think Britain and America differ in their treatment of college sports.
Great video, and part of me really wishes that our college sports had the same sort of scene as in America, because it would be so fun to have an alternative as opposed to like going to, you know, just professional sports leagues, like, you know, going to see like your university where you studied, the athletes there trying to impress, trying to, you know, make their mark. I think would be so much fun. I really want to go to a college football game as well. The atmosphere just looks electric in the entrances. Some of them even have flyovers. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.